Hello, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. My name is Juliana Smith, and I serve as the Deputy Athletics Director and Senior Women Administrator at Colgate University. I'm a proud graduate of the NCAA Dr. Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute helped me refine my gifts and develop new skills for navigating my career as a college athletics professional. I gained clarity about how I want to continue serving within college athletics, and the Leadership Institute helped me build a community of colleagues who support and challenge me through meaningful relationships. As leaders, we should accept the responsibility to continue learning, to continue growing, and to bring others along with us.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at OneQ Leadership. Our guest today is Candace Smith. Candace is the Senior Associate Athletics Director for Internal Operations at University of Akron. Greetings, Candace. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
I'm happy you're on. Looking at your background, I think you've been in this role for over 2 years. Prior to that, you worked as the Director of Basketball Operations for over a decade, and you played some college basketball at Central Michigan. So your experience at Akron and in the MAC actually is pretty intensive. And one of the reasons I want to have you on is one, because of your role as Senior Athletics Director for Internal Operations. But before we get to that, I want to talk about your transition from basketball operations to internal operations there at Akron. You were put into that position in 2020 under one athletics director. Come the next year, a new athletics director comes in. And so, you had to learn a position, learn how to work within the athletics department on the macro level. And then somebody new comes in, so you got to learn how to work with somebody new. And they have their own ideas about culture and how athletics should be run. So you have to learn that too. So it's kind of probably for you, it's been an interesting last couple of years, interesting evolution and learning, and probably some challenges that go along with it. Talk to us a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, most definitely. Interesting is the best way to describe it for sure. Because for the longest, I did not have to deal with that in the ops role. I really kind of found my niche in that role and developed a system that worked for me. So a lot of it was just autopilot. I knew when things were coming up. I knew how to kind of prepare for various tasks and responsibilities. Right. And then by transitioning into the business role, I knew that there was going to be a little bit of a learning curve that came with that, albeit in the middle of COVID, that added to the fire, so there really wasn't much for me to reference just because everything was so atypical being in the middle of COVID. So there was definitely a little bit of like what I like to call is baptism by fire there. But I'll tell you, the one thing that was really good that I think helped in the transition was the fact that I was familiar with the university. I was familiar with the staff. So I'd already kind of developed that rapport with them and had a superficial understanding of the role as well as some of the things that our paths would cross on within the role. But it was really eye-opening to see just how much intricacy went into it that I couldn't see from the role I was in before. So definitely an experience in year one. And then going into year two, I was kind of prepping myself for things to kind of remain in a similar situation. Obviously, we were not as deep into COVID, but COVID was still prevalent, just kind of developing my systems within the role. And then, as you noted, we had a change in leadership, which definitely shook some things up. Anytime you have a change at the helm, there's definitely going to be some change within the department. And so that definitely put me in a situation where I felt like I was back at square one and had to almost relearn how I fit within the leadership team. But then also,
was that kind of uncomfortable, I guess?
Not really uncomfortable. It just was like, all right, here we go. New challenge.
Yeah.
I'm 2 for 2 right now, so it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the first time in a long time that I had to deal with back-to-back change like that. But I do think it definitely stretched me professionally. And the staff that we have now they've been awesome. I love our staff. I think we work very well together. But definitely, being stretched and challenged professionally was an area that I felt I experienced right off the bat coming into this role.
Right. Yeah. And that's probably a good thing, right? I mean,
Yeah,
right, learning and
absolutely.
establishing yourself and actually, especially being in a new, for the lack of a better word, regime, right? In a new
Right.
regime that's establishing how they want to establish the culture, and you are a part of it, integral part of it, can be a good
Exactly.
thing. Yeah, I think that's excellent. One more question on that topic. When you talk about learning a new athletics director, right?
Mhm.
Understanding their pace and understanding how this person likes to be communicated with and what motivates this person, etc. Tell me about that, because that's kind of a that's an emotional intelligence type, internal type thing. Tell me about how you are adapting or have adapted to that.
Yeah, well, I think that is an ongoing process for sure. I don't think that's something that, unless you've worked with someone for like a very long period of time,
Yeah.
I don't think that's something that you get in a year. I think the communication style of the person definitely develops or determines how quickly that develops. And that's something, again, where I had to stretch myself. I had to challenge myself, because for the first 10 of my 12 years that I was in ops, I worked for the same individual. And
Oh
so
yeah.
by year 9, year 10, I clearly knew what that individual liked, didn't like. I knew what may make her tick, how I should approach her. And then moving into the next head coach, I had even worked with her. She was new to the role, and there was obviously some change with her being at the helm, but I had worked with her the previous 10 years. So this situation for me was just very unique in that I had 2 years in a row where I had to learn how to manage up with
Yeah.
two new individuals. So communication is always something that's big for me, and I never have a problem asking questions. And so, as long as that's something that the AD is open to, and Charles has been awesome with, I'll go in and I'll ask questions, and I'll ask, like, what do you prefer? I don't think, none of us are mind readers. And so, as long as that's something that someone's willing to have that conversation about, I think it's best to be head on and direct. And so, like, do you prefer that I come to you for this, or is this something that you want me to just kind of figure out what I think is best and handle? Because they have so many things going on. You don't want to bog them down with everything, but at the same time, if it's something that they want to be involved in, you want to make sure that you're involving them. So I think just getting in the room and having that conversation with whoever is sitting in the AD's chair, or whoever your supervisor is, quite frankly, I think is just a good way to manage up and just get to know how they operate, so that you
Yeah.
can function as successfully as possible within your role.
It's important. Then when you work with Charles Guthrie, who was a unique individual in himself, you know what I
Yes,
mean?
he's awesome.
Right. Internal operations, that is a position and a title that can be structured in a number of different ways depending on where you are in college athletics, right? Seen
Right.
it in a bunch of different ways. For you, what do you consider the primary responsibility of your iteration of that role of internal operations?
Yeah, it's always interesting, when I see someone with a similar title, just what direction every institution has gone. But for me, my main focus is the business office. So I run the business office, everything that comes with that. But I also oversee our sports performance areas, which consists of our strength and conditioning, our sports medicine, and then our HR department as well. I oversee that. So I think when the title was structured for me, it looked at a lot of those internal operations that, obviously, within the name of the position, you have flexibility, but it looked at, for our athletic department, what were some of those internal functionalities that I had oversight of. And that's just what we rolled with.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it varies by the institution and the need of the institution, but for me, it's definitely business, and then a couple of those other internal functions that are obviously integral to an athletic department.
Yeah. So let's break that down a little bit.
Okay.
Business operations.
Yes.
Like, tell me about that. Is it just revenue, expenses, net income? Like, of course, I'm simplifying 100%, but tell me about business operations in terms of specifically college athletic department and specifically Akron.
So the biggest area is budgeting.
Yeah.
And then once those budgets have been set, the budget management and working with the different teams and departments to make sure that they're staying within their budget. So it has to do with a lot of check-in. Again, I'm huge on communication. So open line of communication, we'll try to make sure that we get in front of them on a recurring basis to just check in and, see where they are, see if there's any upcoming larger expenses that we need to be aware of. Again, making sure that we're on the same page throughout the year. If there's anything that they didn't budget for that now has come up and it's an essential expense and we need to take a look at how we're going to fund that, then that's a part of that conversation as well. So budgeting is definitely a huge aspect of it. There's also many other areas such as like dealing with international insurance and taking care of anything that has to do with money and the payment. It'll come through our office. So whether it's structuring like, transactional stuff like a purchase order or sending stuff to accounts payable to be paid, taking care of international insurance for our student athletes, making sure that their scholarships are charged to the correct accounts. All of that is stuff that kind of comes through our office. But as far as like the general or overarching interaction with the coaches more times on the day-to-day is dealing with budgetary management.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk about coaches, because from my understanding and with the coaches I know, they're the big saying with a couple of coaches I work with was like, look, you want me to do 100% of the job, but you only want to give me 50% of the resources, right? So
yeah,
coaches always want more, right? And they can justify it in a way that says, look, in order for me to be successful, I need to have these things. So tell me about how you handle those. Do you handle those conversations or are you just, tell me about
absolutely.
that
Yeah, those conversations definitely come up quite frequently, and so I think it resonates with me because I've been on that side. And so I understand their perspective, but obviously, there are certain restraints that we have. And so what we do is we try to have a conversation and think strategically about how we may be able to make that work. And, if it's something that we can't do, then we can't do it. And sometimes that's a hard conversation to have with them. They don't like to hear no, but I try to do it in a way to where I express that I understand where they're coming from. Right now, I mean, budgets have always been tight. There's always been a need for more money. And then again, not to harp on it, but coming out of COVID really restricted those finances even more.
Right.
And so still having to operate on, you have a normal season and you have to get to the games, you have to feed the student athletes, there's certain expenses that you have to have. And figuring out strategically how to make all of that work can definitely be a challenge, but we don't just sit up here and say no. There are times we have to say no, but we do try our best to work with the teams and the staff to figure out if there's a way around it. Maybe it's something that we can fundraise for. When do you need it? If you don't need it tomorrow, maybe we can fundraise for it and figure out a way to get it, in the future, whatever the case may be. But I think with me being on the coaching side previously, it's definitely helped me try and keep more of a open mind and see the big picture, the whole picture, and just kind of remember what it's like being on that side, because I remember being on that side where
and asking for more and
yeah,
we
and
need
it's
to be
like we don't have
successful, right?
enough money,
Yeah.
how are we gonna budget for this, and we still got to worry about this. And so I get it, I really do. And so I try to show some empathy. We're working with them on things and really try and help them in problem solving, not just have them feel like they're on an island and they have to figure it out on their own.
How much I'll ask one more technical question and then we'll switch subjects, I promise.
All good.
How much planning ahead of time? I had a conversation with a guy and he said he preferred zero-based budgeting, which I'm not sure I completely understand. But how much planning ahead of time goes into it? Or like your budget's dictated by the powers that be, or is it, do you sit down with them prior to the academic year and say, okay, tell me what we're looking like, or how does it work?
Yeah, for us, it generally starts sometime in February or March. And so again, we're having those conversations with our staffs, with our coaching staffs, with our different administrative departments, and also trying to get them, especially those that may be in season at the time. We're giving them reminders like, hey, I know you're in season right now, but just begin to kind of think about this, because it's going to be coming up, and we may not have a ton of time to turn this around and get it back to the budget office, but we want to make sure that it's as accurate as possible, and things are going to come up. There's always going to be something that may be missed that, comes up for the following year, but I really try to to capture as much as possible so that we can make sure that our budgets are accurate. And then, so what we do is we sit down, we meet with all of the teams, and we use the zero-based budget model too, where we build the budget from the ground up based on the needs of the team for that year.
Okay. Is that as opposed to giving a dollar amount and then you figure out what fits in that dollar amount? Is
Yeah,
that
and that's, we try to use a zero-based budget model. It
okay?
doesn't always work out that way. It may come back that from a university standpoint, this is what we submitted, but we don't always get that funding. And so now we got to go back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, now this is what we asked for. This is our dollar amount in comparison to what we asked for. How can we kind of fit what we need and maybe a few things that we want within what we've been allocated? And so that's where the collaboration comes back into play. But I think the biggest thing is trying to condition everyone to think in more of an itemized standpoint as much as
Right.
possible.
Instead of saying just give me a bunch of money and I'll figure it out. Like think about
Yeah,
exactly what you
yeah.
need.
Don't just give me a lump sum to spend on travel. I need to know how much do you anticipate spending for this trip.
Got it. That
This
makes
trip that
sense.
may be 7 hours away, and we may be looking at getting a flight versus this trip that's a 2-hour bus trip. You know what I mean? There's differences there. And so we just have conversation. A lot of our coaches do a really good job with that, which helps us. But if there's something that we notice, we ask and look to see if we can figure out how to kind of again get those numbers to the best of our abilities, as close to an accurate estimate as possible.
Right. Which is excellent. You mentioned oversight, right? In
Hmm.
terms of you have oversight of departments or teams or people. And I wonder about your background in basketball and basketball operations, right? What I understand about operations, especially in basketball and football type sports, that you're exposed to leadership, logistics, recruiting, student athlete development, personnel, and other areas in college athletics or other areas in just management, period. And I wonder how some of these apply in your day to day responsibilities, which you just described some talking about how you help help people set their budget and determine what's necessary, but also in terms of oversight over teams or oversight over departments there at Akron.
So, my first year on the job, I had oversight of two sports teams, but Charles had a different approach to sport oversight. So I currently don't have any sport oversight, but as we talked about before, I do oversee those various departments. So I do have people oversight, and I think for me, the one thing again that's kind of been constant is there's a few staples: open door policy, communication with all, constant communication. We're always just to make sure we're always on the same page with everything as much as possible. But how I interact with each individual may be different based on that individual's personality, what they may need at the time. And that's certainly without question something that's come from being around team sports for sure. You can't, every player doesn't respond the same way. You know what I mean? So how do you get the most out of player A versus player B? It may be completely and totally different, but you have to learn the people, and you have to learn how to manage them and work with them as best as possible. And so that's definitely something that's carried over. And I think that transcends any field. I don't think that's just specific to athletics. You got to learn how to work with the people you work with, and how they respond best. Some people may need a little more tough love. Everybody doesn't respond to that. You know what I mean? So I think that's one thing that's definitely carried over for me. The logistics piece, I definitely still have a hand in that. So I think it was really beneficial for me being sports specific and dealing with a lot of the logistics. It gave me an insight to just how teams function from a macro level. Obviously, depending on the sport, it may be a little different, but everybody needs a bus. And maybe having some of those connections throughout different areas that we traveled previously, will help. I can help them, in that
Oh, really? Those
area.
come into play, huh? The
Yeah,
relationships
yeah,
from.
definitely. So bus bids, and dealing with the bid process is something that comes through our office, obviously, working collaboratively with the purchasing office. So that's something that I've been able to pull from my past experience as an ops person and say, okay, well, this was a bus company that we used in Florida. They did an amazing job. Like, we have a men's soccer team going down there. They don't have a bus company. Let's see if we can connect with one of these companies. And so, I mean, I think that that's been helpful to kind of pull on some of that experience that I've gained from that standpoint. And then, like you spoke, recruiting. I don't have a ton of interaction with recruits, but I might be in a Chipotle and see the men's basketball staff eating with recruit, and having the experience of knowing how to interact with staff and student athletes. I think it's just something that you kind of pull out the closet when you need it. I think just being in athletics as a whole, having those experiences, while they may not come into play on a daily basis, they all are transferable skills that I'll have
Right.
and have to use on occasion.
What's interesting about what you said, I'm gonna try to sum it up in words that I've
Okay.
recently learned and put into a phrase, and I don't even know if it works yet because this will be the first time I'm saying it. But what you're saying is you had to learn, or what you've learned and what you apply is managing people's motivation so that you can lead those people, right? Managing motivation to lead people, right? Understanding how people are motivated so that you can lead them and make those executive decisions that you need to make and that they need to make, which I
Right.
think is pretty excellent. Now, when you talk about managing motivation in people and you
Hmm.
talk about numbers and business operations and budgets, you're talking about two different types of brain functionality and parts of the brain. And I wonder, for you and your leadership style, how does it work with the intersection between those two parts of your brain, right? And provide the most success for the people in the athletics department. And you touched on it a little bit throughout the whole conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have those staff members that are very, like, first of all, let me just say, I think every head coach, they're a head coach for a reason.
Yeah.
So they all have the skill to pay attention to detail because they're detail oriented about something in their craft, and that's why they are where they are.
Right.
Um, does that necessarily always translate into numbers? No, absolutely not. But then I feel it's my role and my staff's role to then help them with that. Again, the nice thing is I can, to a certain degree, speak their language. And so if we have someone who's always on, there's some coaches that are just phenomenal, and I know I can just, I expect to go in, I expect for them to have everything for me. I expect for everything to be itemized. We can have a conversation about it. And I'm like, great, boom, this meeting took 10 minutes. Great. But then there may be some other coaches where that's not their strong suit, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And
It's a
that's
long list.
okay. So,
Right.
and I think the thing that I try to relay to them is it's cool. We all have, areas that we're stronger in than others, but let me help you throughout this process. How can I help you? Does that mean we have to have an extra meeting and sit down and literally comb through everything? We have to, that's fine. You know what I mean? Maybe that's, we sit in this meeting and some of the questions that I know or areas that I've kind of seen have maybe been glazed over. I come in with those questions and I know that those are things that I want to make sure we check off initially. So, I mean, everybody's different. Some people, they get it and it's great, but for those that maybe, like I said, that's necessarily not their strong suit, that's fine. And I feel like that's where this my office comes into to play, where we can kind of bridge that gap for them and help them as much as possible understand. But like I said, I think it's helped me in the fact that the staff that we have, I've had interactions with, I've worked with them, And so we already had rapport there. There was a relationship, and they know I'm not coming for them. It's coming from a place of love, and we're really trying to make sure that we get this thing together so that ultimately it serves them and the student athletes, that they have to the best possible ability.
Right. Excellent. I'll ask one more question and then we'll wrap. This circles back to what we talked about right at the beginning, right? The transition.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you can give us a little bit about the mental mindset of when the head coach changed when you were with basketball and the similarity of the mindset necessarily when the athletics director changed now that you work in the athletics department. There's aspects of that where some people would be uneasy about it, or some people such as yourself or former athletes, right? We're like, okay, well, this is the new challenge. Let's see how we can be successful at and operate at a high level. Tell us a little bit about your mindset there, because working in athletics, many people who are listening will probably have to deal with that in some form of fashion. And so I wonder about your approach to it, A, when you were basketball, and then B, in the athletics department. If you can give us any more information than what you gave us earlier at the beginning of the
Okay.
conversation.
Um, I think the biggest thing to note is that anytime there's change, it's uncomfortable. Some people thrive better than others in the space of change, but I think for anybody, it's uncomfortable. And so for me, there definitely was some unsurety there. Like, okay, I kind of superficially understand what this role entails, but I know without question, being in a leadership role, there's something that I just didn't see.
Yeah.
And what is that going to look like when it crosses my path and I have to deal with it? And it's literally, there's no reference. You know what I mean? So that piece of unknown definitely played on my mental a little bit, but I think the the mindset that I was able to take from just being in athletics, being a former athlete, of just, hey, look, it's grind time. You know what I mean? We're gonna figure it out. And we may not have all the answers, and there may be a couple missteps here and there, but we're gonna figure it out and we're gonna get it done and we're gonna ask questions. And we're going to continue to build those relationships across campus so that in a pinch, you know who to go to and they're willing to help. You know what I mean? So there was definitely some, I don't want to call it fear of unknown, but just anxiety behind just not knowing what's out there. But I think the biggest thing that got me through was just my mentality of just get it done, like whatever that looks like. And then once you've gone through the ringer, then you can fine tune and you can figure out, well, maybe that wasn't necessarily the best way to go. Maybe next time I'll do it this way. Or, what that worked out wonderfully. We're going to stick with that, whatever the case is. And so you're kind of flying blind in a sense. And I will say I was at an advantage because I was in a familiar space. So I kind of had a little bit of a head start, but that's not to say that there weren't any areas in which I second guessed, even was I ready to take on this massive role, or you know what I mean? And then would I know how to handle some of those issues that come up, being at that time, pretty much on my own,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it, again, that's not specific to athletics, but athletics definitely played a part in developing that type of mindset for me.
Yeah. Which is excellent, right? And it seems, I've never been to Akron, but from the outside looking in,
You should
and
come.
and the fact that Charles Guthrie recommended you for the podcast
Oh,
seems like
did
you,
he?
yeah, he did. It seems like you're
Oh,
doing an excellent job there at University of Akron, and I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
oh, well, thank you so much again. I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, ma'am. That was Candace Smith. She's a Senior Associate Athletics Director for Internal Operations at University of Akron. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.